We come this morning to the final words of the Apostle Paul. Final words of the Apostle Paul in this letter, as Paul will close the letter now, as he typically does, giving some personal remarks and making reference to common acquaintances, as he typically does in his letters. You will see later in this section that Paul will speak of a few friends and a few enemies that are true of the relationship that he had with Timothy. So these are the final words of Paul in this letter and to his young friend, but they are also the final words of Paul in the New Testament. They're also the final words of the Apostle Paul, inspired by God and carried down to us and preserved over time. So they're not only the last words to Timothy, they're also the last words to us. They're the last words that Paul would say to us. Yes, I understand that Titus and Philemon still follow in your canon, but those letters were clearly written earlier. Titus around the time of 1 Timothy, Philemon around the time of Ephesians. But this is clearly the last words of the apostle in the Scriptures. So what Paul will do here in this final chapter, and as I said last week, I'm convinced that the chapter begins at verse 6, that verses 1 to 5 belong to the previous chapter. If we were ever to remake the chapter breaks, we would move it to here. What Paul will do in this final chapter then is he will summarize, or should I say analyze, his life and ministry, while at the same time encouraging Timothy to visit him before winter, or before the end should come, before it is over. And so these final words of Paul are spoken to this young man in order to encourage him, but also to send a message down through time to us. Paul says this, he says, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come." Now that word departure is a fascinating word to me, because Paul doesn't use the word death, does he? He doesn't say my death is at hand. He says my departure is at hand. And he does so because Paul has a proper biblical anthropology. He understands the human condition. He knows that we are not simply animals that pass out of existence at the point of death, but rather that we depart in the sense that the mortal falls back to the ground, but the immortal continues on. So Paul doesn't use the word death here. He uses a different word. It is a euphemism for death, yes, but it is not the word specifically for death. Paul is expressing here the normal Christian idea that he expressed in 2 Corinthians 5:8, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And that's what he's expressing here, to leave this mortal body and to enter still living into the presence of Christ. And so Paul uses a word here which indicates that he doesn't believe it's over just because he's dying, but rather that something is going to change in terms of his location. But the Greek word underneath this word for departure is interesting itself, because it is a word that is only used here, never used anywhere else in all of the New Testament. It's a word which in itself is difficult to define because it's not used anywhere else. Some lexicons say it means loosing, some means unyoking, this idea of being disconnected. Okay, that's the idea of departure, but the actual word itself is the word analysis. It's actually the Greek word analysis. Now, I think that's fascinating, and I'm going to pursue a thought here. I'm not sure Paul is pursuing it, but I'm going to pursue it. Is it not true to say that death is an analysis? Now, follow my logic here. Why do human beings do funerals? Why are we the only creatures on the planet to do funerals? Why are the only creatures on this planet who actually purposely stop at the moment if someone has died and bury them and come together in either a memorial or funeral type service? Why do we do that? Is it not an analysis? Is it not an opportunity for us to reflect upon the life of the one who has died and to do an analysis of that individual? Is it not an opportunity for us to ask the analytical questions of, well, who was this person? And what impact did they have on our lives? And how will they be missed in the world? And from a Christian perspective, as we do funerals, we ask the question, what does this mean? What is death? What does it mean to us as those who are left behind? You know, we don't do funerals for the one who's died. I mean, we don't get together and lavish praise on the one who's died in the hope that they hear it. Because they're not going to hear it. If we believe the word I just said, departure, they're not here, they have departed. So it seems rather pointless to do that. No, we do an analysis, if you will, of their lives. We pay tribute in the sense of analyzing who they are. But we're not the only one that does this. We're not the only one to do this. In Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 7, it says, "It is appointed unto every man once to die, and then judgment." Is not judgment an analysis? Is not judgment an analysis? Death is that moment in which a person, an individual, enters into the presence of God to be judged. And judgment is the analysis of the individual to see who that individual really is. Judgment is an opportunity for Christ, as we stand before His great white throne, for Him to analyze who we are. In Revelation chapter 20, it tells us that at that great throne, the books will be opened, and all humanity will be judged for what's written in the books. And what's written in the books are the deeds of the individual. And those deeds will be analyzed by this Christ. He will look through the deeds, and He will ask a question. What do these deeds tell us about who this individual is? What do these deeds tell us about who this individual is? It will be an analysis of our lives. Every thought, word, deed, action, everything that has taken place is written in them to determine by analysis whether their name is written in the book of life. You see, what Jesus is going to do is gather all the living and the dead. Is that not what Paul said earlier about this Christ, who is the judge, the living and the dead? He will draw all before Him, and they will stand before Him, and He will analyze who belongs on His right and who belongs on His left. Who are the sheep and who are the goats? And the determination is made by an analysis of what they have done in their lives. And does their life demonstrate that they're a sheep or a goat? Do their deeds indicate that they love God? Or do their deeds demonstrate that they hate Him? You see, judgment is the determination of the state of the individual by analyzing their life. What judgment determines is who we are. The analysis of what we have done simply reflects who we are. So I'm convinced that Paul uses this word to describe his departure because he believes that as he leaves now, he is about to go into the very presence of Christ, where Christ will analyze his life. And as Christ analyzes his life, it will demonstrate that he is worthy of reward because his life has reflected faithfulness to this Christ. An analysis that he now puts forward for himself. Notice the next verse. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. In Paul's analysis of his own life, he uses two metaphors and a descriptive statement. The descriptive statement is designed to indicate what it is that the two metaphors mean. The two metaphors of running a race or fighting a fight. They are two metaphors that Paul has used elsewhere. The idea of fighting the fight we saw back in 1 Timothy chapter 6, where Paul told Timothy to fight the good fight of the faith. And we see the idea of running a race in 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul speaks of having run a race. But here I would have you notice that they're used a little differently. Observe that they're used slightly differently here. Each is used in the past tense. I have run, past tense, the race. I have fought, past tense, the faith. I have kept, past tense, the faith. Paul is using each to describe what he has already accomplished. The analysis that he lays forward shows that he has been successful in maintaining his trust in Christ all the way to the end. I'm not a runner. I've never been a runner. I think running is the least interesting thing in the world to do. And for those of you who are runners, I think you have a problem. I can't imagine the idea of running. It's not my thing. I know some of you do, and I don't mean to disparage your running. That's fine. I just can't fathom the idea of running 26.2 miles. I mean, I just can't figure out why anybody would want to run from here to Gulf Shores. I mean, that's why they invented cars, right? So you don't have to run 26 miles. I've never been a runner. It's not my thing. But even though I've never been a runner, I do understand what many marathon runners talk about when they talk about the idea of hitting the wall. Hitting the wall. This is a real thing. In fact, they now demonstrate that it's a physiological reality. It's that point in the running where you lose the mental and emotional and physical stamina necessary to continue. You reach that point of fatigue, exhaustion, where you just don't think you can go on. I used to play racquetball a long time ago. In racquetball, you can literally hit the wall. But there was a point about 20 minutes into an hour-long session of playing racquetball, I was pretty sure I was dying. But what you have to do, you have to will yourself to go on. You have to will yourself to push past the mental and emotional and physical fatigue that you are feeling. You have to grit your teeth and say, I will go on. I will continue to run. I won't stop. The runner must will himself to keep going. He must override the pain in his mind and his body. And listen, to have any chance at all of winning the race, you must finish the race. You can't win the race by only going 13 miles of a 26-mile marathon. You're never going to win that race. To have any chance at all of winning the race, you must get across the finish line. You must get all the way to the end. The same is true with a boxing match. You climb into the ring in order to take on an opponent, and you strap on the gloves and climb into the ring. You have to fight all the way through 12 rounds. To get to the end, you have to fight all the way to the end. And yes, there's going to be times when your opponent is going to land just the perfect shot across your jaw, and you're going to be dazed, and your knees are going to buckle, and you're going to go down. And you're going to fall to the mat. But what do you have to do? To have any chance of winning the prize, to have any chance of winning the match, you've got to get up and keep fighting. You've got to finish the fight. You've got to get to that point where you either knock your opponent out or, more likely, make it all the way to the final bell. You will not win the race unless you cross the finish line. You will not win the fight unless you reach all the way to the end on your feet. Paul's analysis of his life is this: he has kept the faith. He's made it all the way to the end. Yes, there have been many times in the course of Paul's life where the opponent has landed a shot across his jaw and he's gone down. But he's gotten back up. There's been many times when Paul has hit the wall in the running of this race and he's had to will himself to keep going. He's had to pick himself up, dust himself off, turn and look at this Christ, ask forgiveness, repent of that sin, and keep going. And Paul says, the analysis of my life is, I have made it to the end. I've made it to the end. I've achieved the finish line. I have kept the faith. Now the sad reality is that there will be many who will not make it to the end. The sad reality, if we haven't figured it out already, 1 and 2 Timothy is loaded with this, there will be many who will not make it to the end of the race. And we know this to be true, don't we? Because Jesus himself even told us this was going to be the case in the parable of the soils. Often it's referred to as the parable of the sower and the seed, but it's much better named the parable of the soils because it's about the soils. The farmer who goes out and casts his seed, and some of that seed, Jesus himself says, will fall on thin soil, rocky, thin soil, and that seed will germinate quickly because the ground will warm fast, and that seed will germinate and it will pop right up. But when it goes looking for water, when it goes looking for sustenance, its roots cannot go down deep, and the heat of the sun will eventually make it fail. There will be many who will join the race, but hit the wall and quit. There will be many who will climb into the ring, strap on the gloves, but when they go down, they won't get up. There will be many who will be planted in shallow soil who will not make it to the end. This past week, we heard a great example of this in Josh Harris. Remember, Josh Harris, a young man, wrote a book several years ago called I Kiss Dating Goodbye. A few years ago, he repudiated the book, and now he has publicly denounced the Christian faith, renounced the Christian faith. He has abandoned the sexual ethic that he himself put forward in the book in favor of a more cultural sexual ethic. James White, in a podcast just this week, reminded us of something that he said a number of years back, that there is coming a tsunami, his word, a tsunami of apostasy in the church. That there will be many in this culture who will buckle under the cultural pressure to embrace the sexual ethic and sexual morality now going on all around us, and they will abandon the Christian faith simply because of the pressure of the culture. But Jesus himself said in Matthew 10, he who endures to the end will be saved. Yes, there are going to be a lot of times we're going to hit the wall. Yes, there's going to be a lot of times when the opponent is going to knock us to the canvas in sin. But the true follower of Christ, the one who is analyzed by Christ to belong to him, is the one who gets up, brushes himself off, looks to this Christ, asks for forgiveness, repents, and continues to carry on trusting in this Jesus. Paul's analysis of his life demonstrates that he has persevered to the end. He looks at himself and he says, my analysis of my life is I have persevered to the end, and it is worthy of the reward that comes for doing so. Which is in the next verse. Henceforth, meaning coming now as a result, henceforth, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Now notice Paul doesn't say a crown of gold. He says a crown of righteousness. A crown of righteousness. Again, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for a crown that recognizes the righteous man. It is a crown placed upon the head of the person who is by nature righteous, simply to acknowledge that he is. It is a statement by the righteous judge. This one is righteous. I have analyzed him and determined that he is righteous in my sight. Again, as I said before, judgment is to determine the state of the individual. Who we are, not what we've done. The analysis isn't about what we've done. The analysis is to demonstrate whether what we've done shows what we are by nature. It simply acknowledges through the evidence what is true about us. Look, Paul would never say that his running the race or fighting the fight produced his righteousness, because that would deny everything that he's written in the theological portions of his writings. He would never say, I've produced a righteousness by this running. Rather, he would say that his running demonstrated that he was already righteous by virtue of his trust in Christ. And all that this analysis will do is simply acknowledge what is true about him. Paul has consistently held that the righteousness of the elect is entirely the righteousness of Christ imputed to them. The righteous judge looks at the person standing before him to make an analysis. Is this one righteous or not? And if his deeds demonstrate that he was in fact an individual consistent with righteousness, because that's what was in his soul, then I will place upon his head a crown which simply shows that. It is not as though Paul is earning the crown of righteousness, as though righteousness itself is what the crown is. The crown is simply a symbol. It's a metaphor for what he is. And let me be clear about something else too. The crown of righteousness, therefore, if it is not our righteousness but Christ, the crown is Christ himself. The crown is Jesus Christ himself. The reward for the truly righteous in the end is the presence of Christ, and to receive from the Father all that is entrusted to him. This is the grand mistake of so much evangelicalism, of thinking that we get out of here and we get a street of gold on which a palace is on and a crown. No. No. The crown is Christ. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. That's what matters. The very presence of this Christ. To look into his face, to see the nail marks in his hands, and to know that he is our righteousness. That's the goal. That's the crown. Paul says, this is what is waiting for me, because I have kept the faith to the end. And it's also true of all who have loved the appearing of this Christ. All who have loved his appearing are those who are eagerly awaiting this analysis. All who are eagerly waiting for the day when they too will be analyzed before this Christ. But do you think there might be some in the church who are not looking forward to his appearing? Do you think there are some? Now that sounds weird, doesn't it? In the church, people in the church, claiming the name of Christ themselves, who would stand and say something like this: well, you know, I really hope Jesus doesn't come back this week, because, you know, those investments are really starting to pay off, and I think I'm finally going to get that promotion I've been looking forward to for a long time. We just bought a new house, and the grandchild is coming, and oh, and I've got this vacation planned. I really don't want him to come back now. Now, I don't think anybody would actually come right out and say something like that with their mouth. But I wonder how many Christians are actually thinking that. Why? Because, as Paul has already said, they love pleasure more than they love God. They love the things of this world more than they love Christ. Again, there's going to be many in the church who are not looking forward to the appearing of Christ. They don't want the analysis. They don't want the analysis because they know what the analysis will demonstrate in the end. They know in their heart of hearts that they're not really committed to this Christ, though they have all the outward accoutrements of faith, and they've convinced a whole lot of people around them that they are in fact believers. But in their soul they know they would much rather stay here than go into the presence of Christ. Which leads me back to the first phrase of the chapter. Okay, chapter starts in verse 6. The first phrase, and I skipped over it, and you may have noticed that I skipped over it, but I skipped over it on purpose because I wanted to leave it to the end. And I have two reasons for leaving this phrase to the end, one that I'll share now and one that I'll share in a moment. The very beginning of this section, Paul says these words, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering." I'm being poured out as a drink offering. Another metaphor that Paul uses here. There's 4 of them in this section alone that Paul uses. The Greek word that's used, the phrase being poured out as a drink offering, is a single word in the Greek. Single word. And it's used only here and in Philippians 2:17. Now, I'm not going to analyze Philippians 2:17 because what Paul says there is precisely what I'm going to say here, so you'll get it. But it's a single Greek word, and the Greek word is spendo. Now, to be honest with you, we're not really sure where this word comes from. Okay, again, it's only used twice. Paul is the only one to use it. We're not really sure where he got it, but a theory has been proposed that he got this word from the Septuagint. You know what the Septuagint is, right? The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that had been in place at the time of Christ, and many of the New Testament writers often appealed to and quoted directly from. It's very possible that Paul, looking for a metaphor here, went to the Greek version of his Old Testament and pulled out this word and makes a connection of himself to the drink offerings of the Old Testament. Now, I've always been fascinated that the drink offerings get so little attention in the church. Have you noticed that? We don't really talk about the drink offerings very much. In fact, most people don't even know what they are. But they're defined in a number of places. The more specific one is in Numbers 15. When an individual Israelite came to offer his sacrifice on the altar to make sacrifice for sin, he was also prescribed by the law to bring a portion of strong drink or wine, some sort of alcoholic beverage that he was to bring along for the purpose of being poured out at the foot of the altar while the sacrifice on the altar was burning. When the priest would kill the animal, put the animal on the altar, light the animal on fire, he would then take the cup of the wine, however much it was doled out, and pour it at the foot of the altar. Now, I'm convinced that it was also, some of it was poured on the animal itself during the burning process. The alcohol in the wine would go up in flame as a part of the sacrifice itself. It's designed, according to Numbers 15:10, to be, now catch this, a pleasing aroma unto the Lord. That is noted specifically related to the drink offering. That when the priest would burn the animal, the aroma of the burning flesh would rise up to the Lord, but what would go up with it would be the smell of the wine itself. The bouquet, if you will, of the wine would rise up into the nostrils of God. And this burning animal and this wine that was poured out would produce a pleasing aroma in the nostrils of the Lord, and he would forgive the sin of the person bringing the sacrifice. It would be a pleasant odor that would cause him to desire to bring atonement to his people. Now again, it's a metaphor, okay? It's not literally God going He doesn't have a nose like we do, okay? But the idea is present. It's a pleasing aroma unto the Lord. What Paul implies here is that his entire life has been a drink offering. The last drops of his life are being poured out of the cup. The last dregs of his life are being poured out, and they're being poured out by the great high priest, who is pouring out his life upon the sacrifice, which is Jesus himself. The great sacrifice, bringing forth a pleasing aroma unto the Lord. Paul says, my entire life has been a drink offering unto the Lord. It is this Jesus who has taken a hold of my life, and he has poured out of me day after day a life which, as it's poured out upon the altar of Christ himself, the very essence of Jesus himself, it is rising up. All of my deeds, my thoughts, my words have been rising up as a pleasing aroma in the nostrils of Almighty God. See what he does? He takes this metaphor and he applies it to his own life, as though his own life has been a pleasing aroma before God. Paul says, my entire life has been poured out by Jesus Christ himself. How many people who claim the name of Christ actually believe that Christianity is something that you add to your existing life? How many people today actually believe that you simply add Christianity to your existing life, right? I'm a man, I am a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a Christian, I'm a two-handicap golfer, I'm a 140 bowler, I hate running. These are all these kinds of things. I've just used it as another descriptor in my life. I'm a Christian, but I'm also an investment banker. I'm a Christian, but I'm also this or that. As though you can add Christianity to your existing life. That all you need to do is add faith, whatever that means, to add faith to all of the hopes and dreams and aspirations and goals and purposes and plans that you have already determined for yourself. As though all you need to do is simply come to this Christ and say, well, I'm going to trust in you, but I'm also going to continue to have all the hopes and dreams and plans and purposes and goals and aspirations that I had before. Paul doesn't see it that way. Not in the least. Paul perceived that when he came to Christ by faith, the entirety of his old life was gone. I mean, you can't imagine Paul on the road to Damascus picking himself up after being knocked off the horse and brushing himself off and going, okay, now, good, Jesus is now going to be Lord, but I'm going to be the greatest rabbi that ever lived. I'm going to go back to Jerusalem, and I'm going to take up the footsteps of Gamaliel, and I'm going to teach, and I'm going to teach the law to people, and I'm going to become a great rabbi. Just like I'd already planned all along, I was going to persecute the church, but I'll stop doing that. I'll just add Jesus to this list of stuff. Do you think he's thinking like that? No. That old life is gone. It's over, it's done, it's ended. Do I need to prove this? Let me give you a few examples to help you think this way. Think about the rich ruler that came to Jesus. Now, I use this illustration a lot because it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Rich man comes to Jesus and says, what must I do to attain eternal life? And Jesus says, well, keep the commandments. And the rich ruler goes, I've done that. Hey. And Jesus looks at him and says, one thing you lack. Go, sell everything you have, distribute it amongst the poor, and then come follow me. And the rich ruler walked away sad because he had much. But here's what's often overlooked in this story. All of that wealth and riches that that man had was his life. He had goals and plans and aspirations for it, didn't he? I'm going to use that wealth to build a new hospital in downtown Jerusalem. And then I'm going to become a great philanthropist in the land. Everybody's going to look to me as a great man, providing all kinds of help in the community and so forth. And I'm going to be great and powerful. I have plans for all of this wealth. You don't have wealth without plans for it. He had plans for the wealth. And Jesus says, you must end those plans. They're done. Your purposes, your plans, your goals, your aspirations of that money, gone! Gone! Come follow me. He couldn't. He couldn't. Jesus was saying to him, you must put the old life away. It's done. Remember in Matthew 16, Jesus says, if you wish to be my disciple, you must deny yourself daily, take up your cross, and follow after me. Think about those two thieves that were crucified with Jesus. Standing in Pilate's praetorium, and they picked up a cross and they began to walk the Via Dolorosa on their way out to Golgotha. Do you think either one of those two thieves was thinking to themselves, well, today I'm going to go out and be crucified, but tomorrow I'm going to check with my investment banker to see how things are going, and then after that I'm going to get with my wife, we're going to go to the south of the Mediterranean and have a little vacation, and I'm going to come back and pick up my robbery lifestyle like I used to have. Do you think they were thinking that way? What were they thinking? The old life is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's been crucified. When Jesus tells the disciples, take up your cross and follow me, he means that old life that you were living before, all of the goals and hopes and dreams and aspirations that you had before, gone! Dead! Dead. You remember those judgmental words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 7? Again, how often do I appeal to these verses? Because they're really scary. Many will say to me on the last day, did we not do many great things in your name? And what will he say to them? Away from you, evildoers, I never knew you. But you know why he never knew you? You know what the really scary part of the verse is? He says, the reason that you're being cast aside is because you did not do the will of my Father in heaven. That's the scary part. Jesus says, listen, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to stand before me on the judgment day thinking they're sheep, but when I analyze their life, here's what I'm going to discover. They were doing their own will, chasing their own goals and aspirations, not mine, and not the will of the Father, which is why they're going to be cast away. You see, it's almost as though Jesus is going to bring these folks before himself on the judgment day, and he's going to say, let me do an analysis of your life, and the aroma that's going to go up from their lives is going to come to the nostrils of God, and God is going to go, ew, what's that? That stinks. It doesn't smell like I want it to smell. It's not a pleasing aroma unto me. What is he going to smell? The smell of death. The smell of death. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul says, for we are the aroma of Christ to God among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. To one, a fragrance from death to death, fragrance of death. The other, a fragrance from life to life. And Paul looked at his life. He saw himself as Christ holding his life and pouring it out on the altar of his own sacrifice. Paul saw the Christian life as a drink offering in the hands of Jesus Christ himself, being poured out over him as our sacrifice of righteousness. Our entire life rising up to God is a beautiful fragrance of love and obedience. Not a life chasing the aspirations and goals that we have. A life that has died to that. In a few weeks we're going to have some baptismal candidates come, and I'm going to push them into the water and then bring them up, and I'm going to say these immortal words. Buried with Christ, raised to walk in new life, because the old life is gone. You see, folks, we don't just add Christianity to our existing life. We don't just add faith to our existing life and continue to chase the aspirations and goals. No, if we truly are those who are born again by the Spirit of God, we are a drink offering in the hands of this Christ who has taken a hold of us and now pours out from us what he wills and desires from us. It's not about trying to keep a rule here and a rule there and try to do this and do this, read our Bible, go to this Bible study, do these kind of things in the hope that that's enough on top of our existing life. No. We throw that old life out. It's gone. It's over. And we come into the presence of this Christ and we say to him, do with me as thou willest. Galatians 2:20, Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. This, my friend, is what Paul means when he says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. A drink offering being poured out upon the altar of Christ himself. Rising up as a beautiful aroma in the nostrils of God. Now, does this mean that every Christian must become a full-time pastor, preacher, minister of the gospel, or missionary to some foreign land? Is that what that means? No. No, the New Testament is clear. The Spirit of God gifts us all differently. Some will be gifted to the office of preaching. Some will be gifted to missionary work. Most of you will not. But you will be gifted by the Spirit of God to live that life in whatever place that the Lord has ordained for you. That you will live for Him, advancing His cause in the world through whatever vocation, whatever purpose. A mom raising her children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord pours her life out as a drink offering into the life of these children. An investment banker goes to the office and pours his life out to this Christ, acknowledging this Christ in all things and leading others to know this Jesus. It doesn't matter what your vocation is. It only matters what you are. It only matters what you are. Every day when our feet hit the floor, when we get up in the morning when our feet hit the floor, we should say, Lord, you've granted me another day. Thank you. Use me this day. Use me this day. Pour me out as a drink offering upon the altar of your own sacrifice. Be the great high priest and pour me out that I might be useful to you this day, living by faith and advancing your cause in the world. This is what Paul analyzed his own life to be, and it's what we should be asking ourselves if that's what the analysis of our life demonstrates. If we were to stand before Christ today, would He analyze our life and say, yes, that one is a pleasing aroma unto the Lord. I have poured him out day by day, and his life has been pleasing unto Christ, unto the Lord, unto the Father. But there's a second reason that I've held this metaphor to the end, and that it has to do with this. Now, some of you may already have made the connection. And if you have, I'm proud of you. If you haven't, that's okay. It's a little obscure, but it's not really that obscure. The Lord's Supper, as you know, holds a number of symbolisms of the connection of Christ to the sacrificial system, right? I mean, to understand Christ, we need to understand the Old Testament sacrificial system. You cannot understand Christ without understanding things like drink offerings. When Jesus took the cup of wine from the table, He said, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." Now, in a sense, Jesus was saying, of course, as we've said many, many times, look, this is the blood of Christ being poured out, that the Father would accept His blood being poured out. The priest would pour out the blood of the animal upon the altar as a part of the sacrifice. But remember, the cup that Jesus picked up was full of wine, wasn't it? It was full of wine. It was a drink at the table. So when He picked up this cup, and He handed it to His disciples and said, "This is being poured out for you," He's making a connection to the drink offering. He's making a connection to that Old Testament sacrificial idea of the priest taking the wine given by the penitent coming before Christ and pouring that wine out at the base of the altar as a sweet aroma. And Jesus says, "This is being poured out for you." Just like the priests poured out. Every Jew in the room would have understood exactly what Paul was talking about here. Would have got it. The table is a reminder of the food offerings. In a sense. Oh, it's a reminder of many, many things. Yes. But in this particular context, it's a reminder of the food offerings, right? It's bread and it's cup. It's bread and it's wine. And as we eat these elements, they're food. We eat them. We eat them in order to be reminded of that which Christ has given to us. The bread, as you remember, is a reminder of His body that is offered on the altar as a burnt meal. The priest would offer what was left of the carcass after they've taken their part to eat. They would offer the rest of it to be burned up. It's a food offering. And so when Jesus took the cup, it comes as a reminder of His own life being poured out upon the altar for His people. It's a reminder of the food offerings, the food and the drink that comes to us from Christ itself. So my friends, when we come to this table, it is an opportunity for us to remember that our lives are completely given over to this Christ. We come to this table to say that He is pouring out of us the life that He has willed and ordained and purposed over us. It's not about our life, it's about His life. We come to remember what He has done and His life and His death being given over to us. So let me suggest, my friends, that the only ones of us who ought to approach this table are those who agree with the apostle that my life is a drink offering being poured out by this Christ. You cannot come to this table if you've done nothing more than barnacle Christianity to your existing hopes and dreams. You can't come to this table because you haven't said, this Christ now comes as my offering and He now owns me. You can't say that. You can't come to the table. It's only those who are able to say, yes, this Christ has taken a hold of my life, just like He took a hold of that cup at the table, and He's pouring that life out of me, and it's all about Him, and it's all about obedience to Him. That's why we come. We remember. We remember. And we testify that this Christ is pouring us out. We testify again, as we do in baptism, that we have died to the old life with all of its hopes and dreams, and we've been raised to a new life in which Christ lives in us and through us. That's what we testify at this table. So we come. But as we do so, we are asked to reflect upon our lives, are we not? Are we not to do a bit of analysis before we come to the table? And what are we to analyze? Well, let us analyze as Paul did. Are our lives a drink offering unto the Lord, a sweet aroma, or are we nothing more than those who go along thinking that they can add Christianity to their lives? Listen to me, my friends. Here's this warning. Heed this warning. Those who fall away are those who've attempted to just latch Christianity onto their existing lives, and they failed to do so. You see, the apostate is the person who tried to just add Christianity. He tried to put one foot in the church and one foot in the world and hoped to keep the balance between the two. But the church and the world are moving in opposite directions. And what happens when you try to keep one foot in one and one foot in the other when they're moving apart? There comes a point you have to lift a foot, and guess which one you're going to lift? You will lift the foot from the church. We come to this table to testify to the world and to be reminded together, to testify before Christ and before one another that He is all in us, and we live for Him. It is His life being lived in us. Not our goals and aspirations, His.